Hello and welcome back, everyone. So during the last session, we have discussed some portion of chapter number 2, Digital Economy Fundamentals. So today we are going to explore the rest of the chapter. So to do a quick recap of what we have so far done, we have provided definitions for digital goods and digital services, and we have explained the concept of zero marginal cost, commoditization, and bundling to you all. And we understood what are the public good features of digital services. And also, we looked at the concepts of in-house production, commons-based peer production, and crowdsourcing. And also, we looked into the concept of value chains, value shops, and value networks. So finally, we also had a look at multi-sided platforms and how they can be exploited in digital business. So that is the point where we have stopped. So today we have to resume from that point onwards. So today we are going to look at network effects and positive feedback, right? So first of all, let's take a look at our content for today and understand what is a network effect, right? So the first point says the network effect can also be called a network externality or demand side economies of scale. So this is the effect that the number of users or amount of usage of a service has on the value of that service as perceived individually by each user. That means how each individual user in a network perceives the value they get out of that network when the number of users or when the usage of service, or if I say the how in each individual user in a network perceives the value they get out of the network depending on the number of users in that network or the amount of usage they have from that network, right? Or in other words, we can explain it as the network effect is the value a new user adds to existing users in a network in the simplest of terms. දැනටමත් යම්කිසි ජාලයක කොටස්කරුවක් වී සිටින පුද්ගලයෙක්ට කියන්නේ ජාලයක පරිශීලකයෙක් කියලා අපි කියමුකෝ. එතකොට එවැනි පරිශීලකයෙකුට අලුතෙන් එම ජාලයට එකතු වෙන පරිශීලකයෙකු විසින් ඇති කරන අගය වැඩි කිරීම, right? අගය එකතු කිරීම. අලුතෙන් පරිශීලකයෙකු ජාලයට එකතු වීම නිසා දැනටමත් ඒ ජාලයේ සිටින අනිකුත් පරිශීලකයන්ට සිදුවන අගය වැඩිවීම. ඒ value addition එකට තමයි අපි කියන්නේ network effect එකක් කියන්නේ. Right? Network effects may be visualized using undirected networks made of nodes and links as illustrated in figure 2.14. So if we look at figure 2.14, 3 different networks have been illustrated here. And if you really look into these, you will observe the networks are made of nodes. Nodes are these small circles. And also links. Links are the relationships or interconnections between the nodes, right? So can you also observe that these networks are undirected? කොයි පැත්තකටවත් direct වෙලා නැහැ, right? So these network effects we can visualize using this kind of undirected networks, which are comprising of nodes and links. Then the nodes may be individual consumers or users using a specific digital service, right? So these circles may represent individual users in this network who are consuming the services offered by this network. Then on the other hand, what is a link? Links may be, this should be actually may be, right? Change it please. And links may be the interaction between the users that are a part of the network, right? So these links represent the interconnection or the the link or the let's say the relationship, right, between these individual users in a network, right? For example, here we have provided common interests, communication or trading. So these links can be formed by way of common interests. On social media platforms, for instance, you establish connections with people who are having common interests to that of yours, right? Maybe you're following the same type of content, maybe you're a part of a similar groups or things like that. So you form connections with people with similar interests. All these links or connections may happen via communication. For example, if we take a telephone network, right, via communication, a link is established within a network between two different users or even multiple users for that matter. And also it can be by way of trading. If we take a stock market, a network like that, in terms of trading, links can be established, right? Then moving ahead, the number of links is a measure of the value of a network and is the essential mechanism creating network effects. Now, this number of links that you observe within a network, right, it can be taken as a measure of the value of that particular network. යම් කිසි ජාලයක තියෙන අගය අපි ප්‍රමාණාත්මක කරන්න උත්සාහ කරොත් ඒ අගය measure කරන්න අපි බැලුවොත්, right? එතකොට ඒ ජාලය තුල තියෙන links ගාන, මේ සම්බන්ධතා ගාන ඒම අගය කිරීම සඳහා බලපාන ප්‍රධාන measurement එකක් වෙනවා. Right? It is a measure of the value of a network and is the essential mechanism creating network effects. Right? ඒ වගේම එහෙම links තිබීම, the presence of such links is the mechanism that creates these network effects that we defined earlier. අපි අර කලින් ඉගෙන ගත්ත network effects හැදෙන්නේ මෙන්න මේ කියන links නිසා. Right? So moving ahead, if the perceived value of a network increases as the number of users increase, the network effect is positive. That means, අපේ ජාලය තුළ, අපේ network එක තුළ ඉන්න පරිශීලකයන් ප්‍රමාණය වැඩි වෙන්න එම ජාලයෙන් එම පරිශීලකයන්ට තිබෙන අගය වැඩි වෙනවා. එහෙනම් අපි කියනවා positive network effect එකක් කියලා. For example, when more and more people get added to a telephone network, then the perceived value of that network, telephone network, increases for the rest of the users of that network too. That is a positive network effect. Then on the other hand, if the perceived value decreases as the number of users increase, the network effect is negative. අපේ network එකේ ඉන්න users ලා ගන්න වැඩි වෙන්න ඒ network එකේ තියෙන perceived value එක එන්න අඩු වෙනවා නම් එහෙනම් අපි ඒකට කියනවා negative network effect එකක් කියලා. Right? Now for instance, imagine a situation where there is a network and when more and more users get added to this network gradually, what happens? There may be network traffic, network congestion. Due to this network congestion, the network would get slowed down. Due to the network getting slowed down, the users will experience that the value they are getting out of the network becomes lesser and lesser. So that is a negative network effect. So the network is not equipped enough to fully accommodate the increased demand that is imposed by the newly added users. Clear? Then moving ahead, similarly, if the perceived value increases as the number of users decrease, perceived value increases as the number of users decrease. network එකක් භාවිතා කරන පරිශීලකයන් ප්‍රමාණය අඩු වෙන්න ඒ network එකේ value එක වැඩි වෙනවා නම් ඒක වැඩක් නැති දෙයක් නේද? So ඒ වගේ අවස්ථාවකත් අපි කියනවා ඒක negative network effect එකක් කියලා. When the number of users increase but consequently the perceived value of the network keeps on decreasing, then that is also a negative network effect, right? Then the network effect, whether positive or negative, is positive feedback from the market, right? So this both negative network effect and positive network effect are results of a positive feedback from the market. Positive feedback from the market and positive and negative network effects are two different things, right? අපිට positive feedback එකක් market එකෙන් ඇවිල්ලා ඒ නිසා අපිට negative network effect එකක් ඇති වෙන්නත් පුළුවන්. ඒ හරහා positive network effect එකක් ඇතිවීමෙත් හැකියාව තියෙනවා. So what is a positive feedback? A positive feedback is such that if there is a deviation in the output in one or other direction, the feedback will make this deviation larger. That means, in clearer terms, how can we identify that in other terms? Now, in other terms, if I say something like that, this positive feedback has the ability to enhance or to amplify changes that tends to move a system away from its equilibrium, right? Positive feedback එකක් නිසා අපි කියනවා යම් යම් වෙනස්කම් ඇති වෙනවා. ඒ වෙනස්කම් වල තියෙන enhancement එක නිසා ඉතා වැඩි ප්‍රමාණයක වෙනස්කම් හේතුයි හට ගැනීම හේතුවෙන් positive feedback එක නිසා සිද්ධ වෙන වෙනස්කම් වල ප්‍රමාණය විශාල වෙනවා වගේම එම හේතුව නිසා යම්කිසි සමතුලිතයක් එම සමතුලිතයෙන් ඉවතට move වෙනවා කියලා අපි කියනවා. අපි හිතමු උදාහරණයකට market එකක්, right? Supply demand කියන variables දෙක කියලා හිතමු. That equilibrium state එකෙන් ඒගොල්ලෝ එහාට move වෙනවා. They move away from equilibrium. So market, if it's a situation where the supply and demand are balanced, due to positive feedback, large changes are caused to this equilibrium, state of equilibrium, and it moves away from the state of equilibrium. So let's try to explain this a little bit further, right? Now, a positive feedback, or sometimes it is called a positive feedback loop, right? A positive feedback loop is a situation when two events are mutually reinforcing. What do you mean by reinforcing? Supporting, strengthening each other. When two different events are mutually strengthening, reinforcing, or supporting each other, with this condition or with this situation, a small change that happens in one type of input we consider can cause a larger increase in both the initial input and the secondary effect or the output, right? For example, think of a situation like this. There is a rise in demand for buying some sort of a property, let's say housing, right? Housing properties වලට demand එකේ increase එකක් තියෙනවා කියලා අපි හිතමු. So then this rise in demand leads to a hike in the prices, increase in the prices. Also, on the other hand, these rising prices of houses makes investors interested to invest in these houses, right? That causes them, the investors, to buy these products, to buy these houses. Therefore, the rise in prices in that case encourages more demand as well, right? So there you see a small change in an input can cause a bigger final increase in both the input and the secondary effect both, right? Now, if we combine this with the network effect, consider a situation like this. If more and more people keep connecting to a social media network, then the network size grows, right? It grows in size, making it more valuable and more useful to the users of that network. When the network grows in size, also on the other hand, it encourages more people to join. Can you see how two events or two variables mutually reinforce or strengthen each other, right? So that is what you call a positive feedback loop, right? So if we explore it a bit more through this illustration, now in a network, consider that this is a social media network of some sort. So new users keep joining the service. New users keep joining the network. Then what happens as a result? It creates positive network effects, which we talked about earlier. Because of positive network effects, the value of the network, the value of this service also keeps increasing. With the increase in this value, what happens? Again, new users keep joining the service. So this is what we call a positive feedback loop or a positive feedback, right? I hope that concept is clearer to you. All right. Then if we continue the discussion on positive and negative network effects, the final state of most of these markets is that every user has adopted the service or bought the good. Now, in this kind of markets where we experience network effects and positive feedback, the ultimate state that it aims to achieve or under optimal conditions, right? At the ultimate level, the assumption is that all the users in the market have adopted this service. Let's say every user has subscribed to a telephone network. Everyone is a user of that particular network. Everyone is a part of a social media network. That is the ultimate level or the final stage. So at this point, what happens? The market ends up being saturated and cannot increase anymore. When the market reaches a point such as this, where it cannot expand any further, we call it a point of saturation. Users la network එකක ඇඩ්ඩලා එතනින් එහාට එක expand වෙන්න හැකියාවක් නැහැ. ඔක්කොම market එකේ ඉන්න users ලා අපි මේ කියන ටෙලිෆෝන් network එක පාවිච්චි කරන බවට පත් වෙලා. එතනින් එහාට එකට expansion එකක් නැහැනේ. ඒකට අපි කියනවා saturation point එකක් කියලා. Right? Then the network effect, if we once again recall ourselves, is measured by the amount of interaction or the number of links in the network. So in a network, the higher the amount of interaction, the greater the network effect. So a positive network effect will drive the market into saturation. What we have to understand is that if this network effect is positive in nature, it will keep driving the market towards a point of saturation, where everybody keeps on adapting to the network, everybody keeps getting services from the network, everybody becomes a part of the network. For example, the mobile market, that is, sooner or later, everyone owns the service or good, the example that I related earlier, right? Negative network effect will initiate a vicious spiral. What is the spiral? In which customers are leaving the market and the company selling it may face bankruptcy. Now, in a case of negative network effect, which I talked about earlier, there I told you that when users keep getting added to a network, but the network gets slowed, or let's say the network is incapable of serving all the users that keeps getting added to the network, at that kind of a situation, users keep leaving the network. They see that there's no real perceived value for them out of this network. So they keep leaving the network. They keep leaving the market, which leaves the selling company, which leaves the owners of this network or the service bankrupt. They lose the money they invested in it, right? So that is the difference between positive and negative network effects. Then also we talk about a concept called direct and indirect network effects, right? Under direct and indirect network effects, what we have to understand is that direct network effect takes place when users impose or users induce some sort of value on other users in the network by means of direct interaction between the users. On the other hand, indirect network effects take place when the aggregated behavior of the users induces value on other users. If there is a direct connection, a direct linkage between or a direct interaction between two users in a network, and if that interaction induces value on other users, we call it a direct network effect. Indirect network effect is where the combined behavior, the collective behavior, or the aggregate behavior of the users of a network creates value to other users. For example, if we take a direct network effect as an example, interactions on social media. Direct interactions between people creates value for others, right? Telephone subscribers. When there are more direct connections, interaction occur between users, it creates value to the users, right? And when two buyers, when a buyer and a seller are combined in a market, multi-sided market, it creates value to those users, right? Direct network effect. Then indirect network effect is where improvements of service quality due to user feedback. That means because of the feedback given by users in a network, the service quality of a network is improved. So that benefits everyone in the network. That is a collective effort of all the users. Collectively or aggregate, in an aggregate manner, users provide feedback about the nature of the network. Then perhaps the network administrators take note of this feedback and they revamp the network, they create improvements to the network, and they improve the service quality to the network, right? Also user product reviews and bandwagon effects. So what happens is when more and more people keep posting reviews about products, right? Let's say sometimes users keep posting comments on Facebook saying that the service quality is very poor. So this causes the service owners to take this feedback into consideration and to create improvements to their service quality, right? So that is the difference between direct and indirect network effects. Moving on, we also should learn about same-side and cross-side network effects. Same-side and cross-side network effects. What happens here is same-side network effects mean that an increased number of users lead to an increased value for other users in the same group. ඒ කියන්නේ යම් කිසි user group එකක ඉන්න පරිශීලකයන් ප්‍රමාණය වැඩි වෙන්න එම පරිශීලක කණ්ඩායමේම සිටින අනිත් පරිශීලකයන්ට එයින් ලැබෙන අගය එන්න වැඩි වෙනවා. Right? Example, telephones, social networks, multiplayer online games. For example, in a social network, when more and more users get added to the network, it increases the value that other users can get out of the network. Let's assume a social media network. Right? So it happens within the same user group. Let's say if it's a Facebook group, when more and more people, users get added to this Facebook group, right? Then it increases the value that the group has to the other users. These networks are made up of from direct or indirect contact among the users of the service. So the connections or interactions happening between the people in the same side network effects can both be direct or indirect, right? Cross-side network effects imply that an increase in the number of users in one user group enhances value in other user groups. That means when one type of user groups increase in number, then it creates increased value to another type of user group. What kind of situations can this happen in? One example is computers and software. Without software, there is no value in the computer. Without the computer, there is nowhere to run the software, right? So if we take the example of Microsoft, right? Microsoft has Microsoft Windows and certain applications such as Word and Excel and so on, so forth, right? So when more and more users adapt to these services, then that means there should be computers to run these services, these softwares in, right? So the computer users, they are benefited, right? People who are in that network. Also, on the other hand, when more and more computers come into play, right, then the software value also increases, because then the number of devices in which the software can be run increases. So that is a cross-site network effect, right? So that is the difference between those two types. Then moving ahead, let's talk about lock-in and switching costs. Right? So what does lock-in mean? It encompasses all mechanisms that a company may use to keep its consumers. යම් කිසි ආයතනයක් විසින් ඔවුන්ගේ පාරිභෝගිකයන් තමන් වෙත රඳවා තබා ගැනීම සඳහා දියත් කරන සියලුම ආකාරයේ පරිශ්‍රමයන්, සියලුම mechanisms වලට අපි කියනවා locking, right? Lock කරගෙන තියාගන්නවා customers. They keep the customers locked to themselves. Acquiring new consumers is expensive, since it often requires intensive marketing and expensive price campaigns. Now, what is the cost-friendly option? Is it acquiring a new customer, or is it retaining the existing customer? Obviously, retaining the existing customer is cheaper than trying to acquire a fully new customer, right? Why? Because we already know about this customer. We already know their preferences. We know their purchase behavior. We know the history of this customer. We know the details about them. We know their demographics. But a new customer, we don't know about that customer. We have to study about that customer. We have to study about their demographics. We have to incur a lot of cost in terms of marketing efforts, right? We have to engage in a lot of campaigns which are very costly in order to gain the attention of such customers, right? So therefore, acquiring new customers is expensive. Another term that we have to learn about at this point is churn. We also call it customer churn. Churn is defined as when a consumer leaves a service offered by a company to go to a competing service. For example, if a user using a dialogue connection leaves the dialogue service to connect with a Mobitel service, then dialogue considered that as a customer churn, customers leaving the company. So what is the goal of companies? They want to reduce the churning as much as possible by exploiting various lock-in mechanisms. So companies employ different types of lock-in methods to make the consumers not leave the company, to make the consumers stay with the company. One example, by making it expensive for users to switch to other suppliers, leading to high switching costs. If a particular company is able to make the switching costs higher for the consumers, then there will be a low tendency of those consumers switching to your competitors. If the switching cost is high, if it's expensive for the consumer to switch. If the dialogue consumer considers that it is an expensive for him or her to switch to Mobitel, then that means the switching cost on their part is high. Right? Maybe in terms of charges, maybe in terms of certain value-added services that they're already getting from the existing connection. Right? Due to many kinds of reasons like this, switching cost can be made expensive. Right? The level of lock-in for a digital service significantly influences the evolution of market share, competition, and formation of monopolies. So the degree to which a consumer is locked into a particular digital service in consideration has an effect on the growth of the market share, the evolution of the market share, right? And also it has an effect on the nature of the competition in that market. And also this nature of lock-in that consumers have to a particular company has an effect on the formation of monopolies in markets, right? So let's say if consumers are repeatedly refusing to leave a particular service provider, if there is a very tight lock-in mechanism employed by that user, maybe eventually that particular service provider will be able to create a monopolistic condition in the market if the consumers are not willing to leave, right? It may eventually, with the lapse of time, create a monopolies in that market. And also it may cause changes in the market share. Maybe more and more market share will be gained by this particular producer or the service provider. So high switching costs lead to strong lock-in. If there is a high cost for the consumer to switch between service providers, then we say there's a strong lock-in between the service provider and the user or the consumer, which may in turn lead to a winner-take-all market. So in this kind of situations where there's a very strong lock-in and a high switching cost for the consumer, we say that particular service provider has become a winner by way of taking all of the market towards their side. Winner take all market, right? So next, we move on to switching costs. Switching costs are the direct and indirect costs for a company to capture consumers from a competitor and for consumers to switch to a new supplier of a digital service. So what is a switching cost? The direct and indirect costs that a company has to incur in order to capture, in order to acquire, in order to gain a consumer from the competitor. And also the direct and indirect cost incurred by consumers to switch to a new supplier of a digital service from the current supplier. It goes both ways, from the supplier's point of view and the consumer's point of view. The total switching cost is the sum of the cost for the supplier and the cost for the consumer. So the total switching cost in a given scenario is the cost incurred by the point of the supplier as well as the cost incurred by the point of the consumer. Right? To capture new consumers, the suppliers must make switching cost for potentially new consumers as small as possible. So if a company desires to attract more and more new customers, then the trick for them or their action plans should be to make the switching cost for the new consumers less and less. If the switching cost for a consumer is less, then that means there is a higher tendency for that consumer to leave their current service provider and come towards us. So the goal of a company should be to reduce this switching cost that can be incurred by a consumer, right? Also, on the other hand, the supplier must make the switching cost as high as possible for its own consumers. While they make the switching cost less and less for a consumer of a competitor's product, they have to make sure that they increase the switching cost that their own consumers have so that their consumers don't leave them to join with a competitor. Right? එතකොට හැමතිස්සෙම ඕගනයිසේෂන් එකක් බලන්න ඕනේ. එයාගේ competitor කෙනෙක්ගේ consumer කෙනෙක් කෙරෙහි තියෙන switching cost එක අඩු කරන්න. Right? They should always try to show that by changing that consumer supplier, the consumer won't lose much. Right? The consumer won't lose the same sort of value, the same sort of facility, the same benefit can be given by us as well. It doesn't matter if you leave your current service provider and come to us, you won't incur any loss. You won't incur any loss. We can give you the same value. We can give you the same benefit. There won't be a huge transition cost for you to change the service provider. It will not cost you a lot, right? So then on the other hand, also organizations must make sure, in order to keep their current customer base, they have to increase the switching cost of the current customer base as much as possible, so that it is expensive for the current customers to leave your company and to join with another competitor, right? So then let's look at lock-in mechanisms.